Picture yourself sitting in a crowded coffee shop. You've got your headphones on, you're staring intently at your laptop screen, and you feel, well, completely and entirely self-contained, like you are an isolated island in a sea of strangers, just sort of going about your day.
Yeah, and I mean, it is the most natural assumption in the world. We look down, we see our physical boundaries, our skin, our clothes, and we just assume that is where we end and the rest of the world begins.
Right. But today, we are taking the stack of sources you sent us, which, by the way, is a really fascinating mix of clinical studies, neurological research, and even like the history of legendary comedy writing rooms to show you what is actually happening beneath the surface. Because the aha moment hiding in all this research is that you are never actually an isolated island.
No, not at all.
Your biology is constantly secretly syncing up with the strangers in that coffee shop, down to your heart rate and your breathing. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because reading through these papers, the researchers keep using the phrase emotional contagion. And honestly, that makes it sound kind of like a virus.
Right, yeah, the literature frames it that way because the mechanism is incredibly similar. I mean, emotional contagion is just the spontaneous spread of emotions and related behaviors from one individual to another.
Okay.
We tend to think of our emotions as these highly complex, uniquely human responses to our environment. But this research highlights that contagion is deeply primal. We observe the spontaneous spread of emotion in primates, we see it in dogs, we even see it in chickens.
Wait, chickens?
Yes, chickens. It is a biological reflex that operates entirely outside of our conscious logical reasoning.
So if it's really that primal, how early does it start? Are we talking about, like, babies learning to mimic their parents once they're born? Oh, much earlier than that. The research actually points to this beginning in utero.
Wow.
Yeah, the studies you provided included some remarkable ultrasound observations. Fetuses as young as 25 weeks gestation will begin to open their mouths and sink when their mothers speak.
That's amazing.
And it gets more complex. By 7 months, a fetus will actually catch a yawn. Wait, hang on, a fetus can catch a yawn. How do you even test that?
Well, researchers had pregnant mothers watch a video of someone yawning. Naturally, the mothers would catch the yawn,
Yeah.
and within 2 minutes of the mother yawning, the unborn babies were observed yawning on the ultrasound. So long before we have any visual concept of the outside world, our biology is already wired to mirror and synchronize with the nervous system we are closest to.
That is wild. But, okay, once we are out in the world, what is actually driving that sync? I mean, if I'm sitting across from a friend, I'm not physically attached to them anymore. How does my body know to mirror theirs?
It comes down to your autonomic nervous system, or the ANS.
Right.
This is the underlying engine that regulates all your involuntary functions.
Yeah.
You know, your digestion, your blood pressure, your body temperature, and crucially, your heart rate.
Right.
There's a study by Murata and colleagues in your sources that illustrates this perfectly. They had participants play a cooperative block stacking game.
Like Jenga.
Exactly, like Jenga. And while they played, the researchers closely monitored their physiological responses.
And obviously, playing a high-stakes block stacking game is going to make your heart race.
Yeah.
But the excitement wasn't just tied to the game itself, right?
Right. The findings were much more nuanced than that. They measured the participants' subjective feelings of excitement against their physical heart rates.
Okay.
A participant's excitement didn't just rise in a vacuum because their own heart rate went up. The psychological feeling of excitement spikes specifically in the moments when their heart rate physically synchronized with their partner's heart rate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The autonomic nervous system isn't just regulating your body, it's acting as a radar. It uses your own physiological state to understand and match the affective state of the person you are with.
So are we basically like biological tuning forks? Like when I walk into a room stressed, do I literally make everyone else vibrate with stress?
That is a very accurate way to visualize it, yeah. And it highlights a challenging reality about contagion. Your nervous system doesn't filter for just the positive emotions.
Right, of course.
Just as a crowd in a stadium can share a massive resonant wave of joy and excitement, a group of people sitting in a high-stakes business meeting will invisibly share tension, anxiety, and frustration. This mechanism leaves us highly susceptible to the emotional climate of our environments.
Which makes me think of that massive Facebook study from 2014 that was included in the sources, the one where they actively tested if they could alter people's moods.
Ah, yes. The methodology there was certainly a watershed moment in understanding digital contagion. Facebook adjusted the algorithm for the news feeds of nearly 689,000 users.
That is a huge sample size.
Huge. They essentially filtered the content, showing some users slightly more positive posts and others slightly more negative posts.
Just to see what would happen.
Exactly. The goal was to see if the emotional tone of the content altered the emotional tone of the user's own subsequent posts.
And people absolutely hated this when it came out. I mean, the backlash was huge because nobody wants to feel like a puppet having their emotions pulled by an algorithm. The reaction was intense. However, when you impartially look at the actual data and the academic criticism of the study, the effect size was microscopic.
Really? How small?
The researchers observed only a 0.07% decrease in negative words used by people whose feeds were manipulated.
Oh, wow. So practically nothing.
Right, it was a tiny statistical shift. But the scale of the public reaction proves how deeply sensitive we are to the mere concept that our emotions can be unconsciously shifted by an outside force. We fiercely protect our sense of emotional independence.
Yeah, we want to be in control.
Yeah.
So, okay, if we are always unconsciously catching these emotional vibrations, what happens when we intentionally try to sync up? I'm thinking of the choir research in the stack. That seems like the ultimate test of getting a group of tuning forks to vibrate perfectly together.
Oh, a choir is an incredible laboratory for this exact phenomenon. When you sing, you are biologically forced to change your breathing. You engage in slow, deep, regulated respiration. This specific breathing pattern acts like a switch, triggering your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest counterpart to your fight or flight response.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when dozens of people sing in unison, their heart rates and breathing patterns deeply synchronize.
Now, I was reading the Frontiers study on this, and there was this detail that completely caught me off guard. The researchers mapped out the biological network of the entire room, and they found that the conductor was essentially puppeteering the biology of everyone there.
Yes.
But specifically, it was the conductor's left hand that was driving the physiology of the room. I mean, how is that even possible? Why the left hand?
Well, in that specific case, the conductor happened to be left-handed, so her most expressive, dominant, rhythmic gestures were coming from that hand.
Oh, okay.
But the how is what really matters here. It comes down to visual entrainment. The singer's brains are intensely tracking the micro-movements of that hand to anticipate tempo and volume.
So they're physically mirroring it internally.
Exactly. Their motor cortices are essentially mirroring the gesture, which then regulates their breathing, which in turn regulates their heart rate. What's fascinating here is how this dynamic turns the choir into what researchers call a superorganism.
A superorganism, like
Yep.
a hive of bees.
Exactly like that. But to function as a superorganism, a group requires a very specific biological network topology. You need high segregation, meaning the sopranos, the altos, the tenors are all maintaining their distinct, complex vocal parts without getting confused.
Right, they have to do their own job.
Yes. But simultaneously, you need high integration, meaning every single singer is intensely listening to the whole room, tethered to that conductor's hand.
And when they hit that perfect balance of doing their own thing while being totally connected to the whole, what happens inside their bodies.
The hormonal markers shift dramatically. Cortisol, which is our primary stress hormone, significantly drops. But interestingly, oxytocin, which we often call the cuddle or bonding hormone, also decreases slightly. It decreases less than it would if the group were just sitting around chatting, but it still goes down.
Wait, hold on. Why would a bonding hormone drop when you're literally in a room bonding with dozens of people? That
yeah.
feels completely backwards.
I know, it seems counterintuitive at first, but researchers hypothesize that oxytocin often spikes when we are actively seeking connection or when our brain is trying to overcome social anxiety to build a bridge with someone.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so when a choir achieves that superorganism state, the system is fully integrated, the participants feel completely secure, the biological need to actively bridge the gap vanishes, so the system doesn't need to pump out high levels of social hormones.
Oh.
The entire room just drops into a baseline of deep, resonant calm.
Okay, so a choir is this beautiful, highly structured environment. They have sheet music, they have a conductor. But what about normal life? How do we measure this invisible sync when two people are just sitting in a room having a completely unscripted conversation?
That is where the research gets incredibly technical. To understand natural human connection, scientists often study what happens when synchrony operates differently than the typical baseline. Which brings us to the PMC study analyzing conversations involving children with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD.
Right, and they weren't just observing these conversations with a clipboard. They were recording child-clinician interactions, specifically during tasks, meant to get them talking spontaneously, like discussing emotions or social difficulties, and then running the audio through some very heavy AI algorithms.
They really were.
And I was looking at the metrics they used, and I have to admit, terms like dynamic time warping distance and word movers distance sound like sci-fi concepts. What are those algorithms actually measuring?
Let's break down dynamic time warping distance because it is a brilliant concept. Imagine two people walking on parallel paths. One person might speed up, then slow down, then stop.
Okay, varying their pace.
Right. And the other person is walking at a slightly different pace. Dynamic time warping is a mathematical way to measure exactly how much you would have to stretch or compress one person's timeline to make their walking pattern perfectly match the others.
Oh, wow. So in a conversation, it's measuring how much my vocal rhythms and pitches are stretching to match yours.
Precisely. The AI is looking at the microscopic gaps between the child and the adult. It measures the distance in their vocal pitch, the intensity or volume of their voices, and with word movers distance, the literal semantic gap between the vocabulary they choose to use.
So tracking the words, too.
Yes, we are constantly automatically adjusting all of these factors to close the distance between ourselves and our conversational partner.
Are we all just walking algorithms trying to unconsciously minimize our dynamic time warping distance with whoever we're talking to?
Basically, yes. At a foundational level, our brains want the efficiency of alignment. But the study revealed that children with an ASD diagnosis exhibited higher mean distances across these metrics compared to neurotypical children.
No.
The physical and lexical gaps were wider. They displayed less of that automatic fluid synchrony. In fact, this lack of synchrony was so mathematically distinct that the algorithms could successfully use it to classify the clinical diagnoses just by analyzing the audio files.
It's incredible that a computer can diagnose a clinical difference just from the mathematical space between two voices.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a perfect system across the board, was it?
No, and the exceptions are very revealing. The researchers noted that older females in the study showed an improvement in classification, meaning their synchrony looked closer to the neurotypical baseline.
Interesting.
Yeah, this points to the complex phenomenon of masking. It suggests that while coordination might have a biological baseline, older girls on the spectrum often learn to consciously adapt and mimic neurotypical social communication patterns over time.
Which brings up a really crucial point for anyone listening. If our bodies are wired to sync, and algorithms can measure how well we do it down to the millisecond, how do we actively manage this?
It's a great question.
Because, frankly, if I'm a biological tuning fork constantly picking up on everyone's stress, anxiety, and pacing, that sounds exhausting. How do I get better at connecting without getting completely overwhelmed?
That is the core objective of emotional intelligence, or EI, training. The literature provided from positive psychology and the New Ways manual focuses heavily on this transition.
Okay.
The goal is to move away from implicit, automatic contagion where you are just a passive sponge soaking up the room's tension and move toward explicit, intentional attunement.
Hold on. Let me push back on that idea for a second. I thought the whole point of empathy was feeling what the other person feels. If my partner or my coworker is incredibly sad or stressed, shouldn't I feel that with them?
That's a common thought, yes.
Are you saying I should try to be emotionally detached?
You're touching on a very common and very dangerous misconception about empathy. Empathy fundamentally requires autonomy. Simply collapsing into someone else's emotional state isn't empathy, it's emotional merging.
Oh, I see.
Think about it like this. If someone is drowning in a river, jumping in and letting them pull you under doesn't save them. Now there are just two people drowning.
Okay, that makes total sense. You have to stay on the bank to throw the rope.
Exactly. And the New Ways source provides a highly practical somatic exercise to practice this grounded attunement.
What do you do?
It asks you to start by simply arriving in your own physical body. You have to establish your own baseline first. Notice your feet on the floor. Then you imagine the other person, and you allow your body to sense what they are feeling if they are grieving. You might let your chest feel heavy, but crucially, you place one hand on your heart or your belly.
To literally anchor yourself in your own physical space.
Yes. The physical touch reminds your nervous system of its boundary. The mantra they pair with this is, I can feel you without losing me.
I could feel you without losing me. That is incredibly powerful.
It really is.
And once you're grounded like that, the sources offer some really practical, actionable takeaways for how to engage. You don't need to deliver a perfectly scripted speech to connect with someone.
Not at all.
You can use micro responses, just a slight nod, tilting your head, or simply saying, I hear you. You can use cognitive reappraisal, to intentionally reframe the situation in your own mind so you don't panic. You can even build an if-then plan before you walk into a stressful environment.
Right, an if-then plan is a great mechanism for protecting your baseline. If I feel my chest tighten when my boss walks into the room, then I will take 2 slow, deep breaths to trigger my parasympathetic nervous system.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me.
Hmm.
The literature points out that to be attuned to someone, you actually don't have to fix their problem at all.
No, and our urge to fix a situation is very often a selfish reflex.
Wait, really? Selfish?
Yes, because we want to alleviate our own discomfort with the other person's negative emotion. True attunement is simply bearing witness. It is allowing your nervous system to be a calm, stable presence that helps their nervous system regulate.
Right.
You are just making them feel less alone in their experience.
Okay, so we've talked about this on an individual level. If we connect this to the bigger picture, what happens when you take a whole room of people who have mastered this? A team of emotionally attuned individuals who can regulate themselves but are deeply connected to a shared goal.
Well, when you scale that intentional attunement up, you enter the realm of peak group flow.
Which brings us to Mel Brooks. I was genuinely surprised to see the Greater Good Science Center article about the 1950s Sid Caesar comedy room in this stack of scientific papers.
It's an unusual source, but it fits perfectly.
It really does. You had Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Neil Simon, and some of the greatest comedic minds in history stuffed into a tiny suite in Manhattan. They were famous for being able to rewrite a complete 8-minute television sketch in exactly 8 minutes. They operated as a single multi-headed comedy organism. It's what the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi famously coined as group flow.
Group flow is the pinnacle of human synchrony. It is a highly sought-after state where a team operates at maximum creativity and cohesion without friction. The researcher R. Keith Sawyer analyzed this state and outlined key conditions required to achieve it.
And what are those conditions?
Foremost is a shared goal, but the nature of that goal dictates the flow. Sometimes a group is engaged in problem-solving like a corporate task force trying to hit a specific quarterly target.
Right.
But the Mel Brooks writers' room was engaged in problem-finding.
Problem finding, like a jazz ensemble or an improv comedy troupe.
Exactly.
The goal isn't to fix a spreadsheet. The goal is to discover something brilliant together, making it up as they go.
Precisely. And to successfully figure it out as they go, the group requires equal participation among members of similar skill levels and an absolute blending of egos. They must engage in what improv actors call deep listening.
I think about that a lot with the tuning fork idea. Like if I strike my tuning fork, but I cover it with my hand, because I've already decided exactly what note I want the room to hear next, I'm not letting anything resonate.
That's a great analogy.
In improv, if you walk into a scene already deciding what your punchline is going to be before your partner even speaks, you're not collaborating. You're just waiting for your turn to talk.
Right. And the text highlights a classic example of how improv completely collapses when that happens.
Oh, the dog mess scene.
Yes. A couple is acting out a scene walking through a park. The woman points to the ground and asks, "What's that?" The man establishes the reality of the scene and says, "It's a pile of dog mess."
Sick.
But the woman replies, "No, it's a lottery ticket."
Right. Which makes no sense.
Exactly. She had already written the script in her head before he opened his mouth. She completely ignored the reality her partner offered. Group flow dies instantly the moment someone forces their individual script onto the collective.
It's the golden rule of improv yes and. You have to accept the reality, the other person gives you the yes, and then you build your contribution on top of it, the and.
Which introduces the ultimate paradox of achieving group flow. Every single participant in that room must feel completely autonomous. They must be highly competent and confident in their own skills.
Sure.
Yet, simultaneously, they must remain entirely flexible, actively suppressing their own ego, and be completely willing to defer to the emergent, unpredictable direction of the group.
That's a tough balance.
It is. It relies heavily on tacit knowledge, the unspoken rules, the shared history, and the deep familiarity a team develops over time.
It's like the choir conductor's left hand. But instead of one person directing, the baton is being passed around the room at lightning speed, and everyone intuitively knows how to catch it.
That is exactly how it functions.
Yeah.
It is continuous, dynamic attunement.
So we've covered incredible ground today. We started with the realization that connection is automatic down to fetuses yawning in the womb and heart rate sinking over a game of blocks.
We did.
We looked at how scientists use AI to literally measure the mathematical distance between our voices and how you can use somatic tools to ground yourself so you don't drown in the emotions of the room.
Yeah.
And finally, we saw how blending your ego can lead to peak group flow. So what does this all mean for the listener walking around in their daily life?
Well, it means that human connection is not just a poetic metaphor. It is a measurable, physical, and highly trainable reality.
Right.
Your nervous system is constantly in a dialogue with the nervous systems around you. Once you understand that mechanism, you stop being a passive victim of emotional contagion. You realize you have the immense power to actively shape the emotional microclimate of your workplace, your friendships, and your home.
And before we go, we want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
We noted earlier that unborn babies will yawn in sync with their mothers. That means we begin biologically harmonizing with other humans before we ever take our first breath of air. So, if our nervous systems are designed from the very beginning to constantly bleed into one another, matching heartbeats, catching stress, and syncing brainwaves, we have to ask a difficult question.
What's that?
Is there really any such thing as a truly independent, isolated thought? Or are we all, always, just singing our part in a massive, invisible choir?
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into your sources. The next time you are sitting in a crowded coffee shop feeling like you are on your own isolated island, take a moment to look around. Remember those invisible strings. Keep listening closely to the world around you. We'll catch you next time.